Hey guys, welcome to my first ever makeup tutorial, so let's jump straight into it. First things first, primer. To be honest with you, I'm not a huge fan of primer, but the only exception I'll make is for radiant primers, and this Charlotte Tilbury one really evens out my skin tone. I like keeping it on the edge of the face because I find that primers, when you have too much in the center mixed with foundation and powder, by the end of the night your makeup looks super claggy and it just looks even oilier. So next up I have a liquid highlighter. I like layering the glow, so I will do a couple of layers like the radiant prime, and then I'll do a liquid illuminator on top, which is what I'm doing now. I like popping it just on the cheekbones. Some people will take this and mix it into their foundation, which I know a lot of people do. However, I don't like doing it because I like a full coverage beat, and I find that when I mix the liquid illuminator into the foundation, it actually changes the formula. And so if you're going out at night and you want a long wearing beat, it won't really do the job for you. However, I like popping it underneath just to layer that glow. And also, before we go ahead, I just want to say this is a very full coverage routine, so if you like that dewy finish, this may not be for you. Next up, I've got the Kosas lip oil. Of course, you've always got to prep your lips because by the time you get to the end, your lips get really crusty, but this is my favorite at the moment. Gives a really nice glassy finish, which I quite like. Next up, I am prepping the eyelids. I love using this NARS Soft Matte Concealer because it completely blacks out all the blue and the green in the eyelids. As you can see, it really just gives you a blank canvas. I love this concealer. I am totally obsessed. I normally use the color Custard, but I have run out of that, and Cannelle is quite similar. It's probably the shade lighter, has slightly pinkier tones. And I actually set that concealer with this NARS loose powder. It's in the color Beach, and it's actually got a nice yellow tint to it, which I find doesn't give me that weird flashback or really pinky undertone, which some translucent powders can give me. I've been experimenting with this lately, and to be honest with you, I love it. It's a little less yellow than banana powders, which I find can be too yellow, especially if you've got fairer skin. But this is a really nice balance between a really white translucent powder and something that just has a little bit more of a yellow tone. Now, next up, this clip is so weird. I don't know why it's glitching. However, this is a really nice bronzer that I have, Give Me Sun in MAC. I just use it in the crease to warm up the crease area and the eye area, just so it gives me a base to start somewhere. So now we have my all-time favorite NARS eyeshadow in Tulum. I like using this as a transition crease color. It sort of gives me a starting point to how I want my eyeshadow to look. If you can see, I start to buff it out closer to the edge and a little bit higher than the actual socket. I like to use it as an illusion to create a deeper socket, which I personally prefer as my style. I like to make my eyes look quite large and quite smoky and deep, and this sort of gives you a starting point. And as you can see me pointing in that direction, I start to blend it out further and further out from the actual eye. Next up is the MAC eyeshadow in Saddle. This is another favorite of mine. I use in almost every makeup look, but I like using this in the crease, once again adding depth. And as you'll see throughout this whole tutorial, I keep using colors that go darker and darker, but I like to start off light first, so then you can see how far you really want to go, especially if you don't do eyeshadow too often. You don't want to go too dark because it's really hard to buff out. So I start off from light, medium to darkest. Some people go straight in with the dark color, but I find it just easier to take my time. And you can see me buffing it in the same area once again, and I do take it a little bit higher than the crease. Again, I take Saddle from the palette. I now pop it on the eyelid, and this is really going to give me that matte brown eyeshadow look that we're trying to achieve today. This is sort of my go-to look on every occasion. If I'm in a hurry and can't be bothered to think of anything, it works every single time. But I'm buffing this all over the lid. I'm using a nice fluffy brush, but it's not too soft that it can't pack color on. As you can see, I am going back in one more time. You can keep doing this until you reach sort of like the color and depth that you really want from it. I like quite deep eyeshadow, so you can see me going back again and again and again until I kind of get what I want. And I'm just showing you how I sort of pull it up in that shape. Now we're going into some of my favorite eyeshadows from the JACLYN Hill palette with my favorite brush of all time for Asian eyes, especially in that crease area. I'm going to sort of mark a V shape on the outer edge, and I want to shape it so that it sort of lifts and pulls my eye up, but also at the same time create the illusion of a bigger eye. And you'll see as I keep adding depth into that color and pulling it up, it will just make my eye wider and wider compared to where we first started off. This brush is incredible. I use it on almost every client that I have, because majority of my clients are Asian and our eyes are a very specific shape, and I feel like this brush fits perfectly for almost every client and every look that I do. So I've actually purchased like 4 of these because I love it so much. But yeah, if you can see the comparison, a little bit deeper than the other side. And then also, if you ever make any mistakes, take a really clean fluffy brush. You know, it's hard working with matte dark colors. Now I am going in with another favorite of mine from this palette. It's called Chip, and I'm using that layering technique where I use light, medium to dark, and I'm taking another darker brown on the outside corner of the eye with the same brush that I used before, because I really like that brush for shaping the outer corner. My technique to making my eyes look bigger is actually going a little bit above the actual crease, because you're creating an illusion. If your eyes are a little bit smaller and you want to create the illusion of a bigger eye, you're almost sort of going to make a fake crease, and it's kind of scary sometimes, but as long as you've got a nice fluffy brush, you can do anything. And as you can see, I'm pulling it up a little bit higher on the other side as well, just trying to shape the eye. So for this step here, I've got the darkest brown in that Morphe palette that I love, but honestly, you can use whatever you like. You can use black as well if you like, because really what we're doing here is lining the eye to create more of like that smoky effect. Before I pop on that gel liner, I like to have a bit of a smoky liner done with powder first, so that it doesn't look too harsh, and you can keep that nice smoky hazy effect going through the whole look. I'm using an angled brush here. You can use whatever you like, but an angled brush will work best, obviously, because it'll go as close as it can to the liner. If you can see what I'm actually doing, I'll show you here, is that I'm pulling it out a little bit. I'm not really trying to make a winged liner exactly with it, but I'm trying to elongate the eye. And even if you go 2 or 3 mils outside of the actual eye, it just pulls the eye out. You don't need to make a crazy cat eye, because obviously that technique is a little bit harder. Now for the actual gel liner, I like using dip down because I prefer working with browns as opposed to blacks. I find it a little bit harsh. I'm using a random cheapo paintbrush that I bought from an art store. I don't really like it that much. I think synthetic brushes are better. I think this one's made from natural bristles, which is not as good. But with this gel liner, you can see that I haven't actually made it a wing. It's just a really soft line. Now you want to clean up that eye area, but when I clean that eye area, as you can see, I'm sort of lifting it up so it shapes the eye, so in that cat eye sort of form. Next up, I've got my favorite mascara at the moment. Not that I really like mascaras in general because my lashes are so short, but this does not smudge, and I hate smudged mascaras. It's like my pet peeve. Cannot stand it. This comes off in tubes, which is perfect. I am going to be dead honest with you guys. I have no idea why I was putting concealer on at this point. I normally do it after the foundation, but nonetheless, let's talk about this technique and this product. I get asked all the time, how the hell do I get rid of dark circles? And honestly, this is my technique for myself. This will not work for everybody because it is a very full concealer. It is a very full coverage concealer, and it is very matte, but my skin is quite hydrated most of the time, so it works so well for me. As you can see, I'm just using a flat concealer brush and sort of placing it where I want things to be covered completely. I use a beauty blender to blend this out because it's quite matte, and you just need something that really sort of buffs it out really nicely. But as you can see, it literally just takes away everything. I always do this as my base for my under eyes, and then I'll pop on a creamy concealer on after, but you'll be able to see that later on. But basically, I just want to talk to you about this first and why I do it. But it is a full coverage, and if you want to get rid of everything, this will do the job. Alright, so we're going to get into the foundation. I am using NARS Sheer Glow. It is one of my cult classics. I love having this in my kit because the color range is absolutely incredible. I don't really like a pink undertone to my foundation on myself, and a majority of my clients are Asian as well, so I always like to have something a little bit more yellow, a little bit more golden, and NARS will always cater to that. This foundation is kind of like a medium to medium full finish depending on how you use it. The way I'm doing it right now is pressing it in with a beauty blender, which will give me a medium coverage. However, when I want a full coverage, I'll go ahead and use a very dense buffing brush instead. I just want to point out that there's a weird like orange to yellow undertone in this video up until this point, but you'll be able to notice very, very soon that I get up from the chair and I finally adjust the lighting. I'm just playing around with the lighting at the moment because I have no idea how to film, obviously, but here I am getting up and changing the lighting, so hopefully it's more even. Alrighty, this is Nude Sticks Bondi Bay. I like using a bronzer to contour my skin. I recently have stopped using really grey contouring powders. It's not that I don't like them, but at the moment it's not really what I'm vibing with my makeup. I like a softer, bronzy sort of finish. So I like using this. This is new to my kit. It's super easy to use. It's super blendable. It's super soft. And I just use it just under the cheekbone, around the temples, around the forehead, because my forehead is huge. So I like bronzing it up very well. And I definitely take it around the jawline because I like a very chiseled jawline. My face is naturally quite round, so I like to define it, but I'm buffing it out with one of my favorite Real Techniques brushes of all time. And finally, we're getting into the concealer. This was a bit that I accidentally jumped the gun on, but as you can see, I've already got a bit of concealer on, so I didn't go as heavy-handed, but I'm going back in the same spots just for the sake of it. This is going to be a full coverage beat. I love this concealer. I'm obsessed. And then the reason why I go back in with this NARS creamy concealer is actually so that I can bring a bit more light back into the face area. Custard will sort of lift and open the under eye area. I like using and layering this concealer on top of a matte concealer because it sort of brings that dewiness or that wetness back into it. It sounds really crazy because I am going to powder this down, but for me this technique works so well because it's all about layering, and even if something is going to get powdered down, that finish will eventually come through. Pop it in the Cupid's bow, under eye area, chin, and I let the eye area dry a little bit, as you can see me waving my hand so that it dries down, and then I'll go back in and blend it out. This lets it set a little bit, and I learnt this technique from JACLYN and it works so well. By letting it set a bit, it sort of builds up the coverage so you don't wipe it away completely. Alright, now I'm going to set the under eye area. This is the most important part in my makeup routine because it smooths and changes the texture of my skin completely. This is so important to me. Without this step, honestly, my skin looks so textured, and I do this on clients as well. Even if they've got dehydrated skin and they've got textured skin, I will do this step because the powder fills out the pore completely. I get asked all the time whether my foundation makes my skin look really smooth. It actually doesn't matter. The most important part is the way you set your powder. And as you can see, I press it into my skin until you can no longer see any more powder left. It's really important that you don't sort of leave the powder under there because I don't really like baking with it in that way. I just press it into the skin. And next up, I've got the Laura Mercier translucent powder in this color medium deep. I learnt this technique off of Harush, who is the Kardashians' makeup artist. She pretty much just sets that contour, and so this kind of deepens up that contour or that bronze. Even if you see this color, it's not a very cool color. It is more of a warm color, and this is probably what you've been told not to do. However, this technique works so well for me, using a warm color to sort of contour and bronze with and to create shape. It still works so well without having that weird muddy gray sort of contour that you can get sometimes with traditional contour products. To clean up that contour, just to soften the lines, I'd go back into the powder that I used to set my under eye and just buff it out until it's nice and smooth. So this product and this technique is literally my holy grail. I don't think I've ever done my makeup without doing this. Every time I set my foundation, it makes my skin look very flat. So I need to take Luminous Light from Hourglass, dust it all over underneath the under eye area, the forehead, the nose, the chin. And so it takes my foundation and my base from very flat to very skin-like. Even though I've got heaps of makeup on, it sort of brings it back to life, makes it look less cakey, and it's incredible. And now we're going in with MAC Give Me Sun, which is what I used on my eyes in the very first step. We're just going to tie everything together, and if you look at the motion that I used when I buffed this bronzer in, I constantly swirl it. I never ever just drag it across the face. This is the key to getting a really seamless finish. No matter what I use on my skin, I will always buff it in like that in circular motions, and I always go back to the same area just to make sure there's no sort of patchy part. Next up, I have the Hourglass-RADIANT Bronze Light, one of my all-time favorite bronzers. I don't think I've ever done a makeup look without this one, but it has a beautiful glow. It has a bit of a blush in it too, so I like using it all over the cheekbone, and I do take a little bit above the forehead just to tie everything together. One of my favorite blushes of all time is Melba from MAC. I pop it on the high points of the cheekbone to give a fuller look. If you want a more defined and chiseled look, which I do sometimes, I do a little bit closer to the contour line so it doesn't give me too much fullness in the cheeks, but today I've just gone for a fuller look pretty much. But this blush is honestly my holy grail. If you just want to have one blush color, I would highly recommend Melba, especially if you've got textured skin. It's a matte color and it won't make your skin look more textured with any shimmer in it. So now I have the highlighter from Becca Cosmetics. This is an absolutely amazing formula. It gives me a very wet skin-like finish. I really love this color as well. I've been using it for years. I pop it on the very high points of the cheekbone. I try not to spread it too far. I just want it to catch in the photos in specific areas and a little bit above the brow bone as well. So you don't need to go that hard. You don't really want to stripe across the face. I do take a clean brush always and dust off the excess because it looks crazy when, you know, you can see it in person and it's a really strong stripe. So now I'm finishing off the under eye area. I'm going back with the same colours that I used on the top, to be honest with you, nothing special. However, I'm using Saddle again, and I'm going to do the outer 2/3. So this is going to sort of shape the eye area and sort of pull it out a little bit. I do take a little bit in the front, but I never dip it back into the pan. I just take whatever's left over to sort of even out and sort of blend and diffuse it so it's nice and buffed out. But as you can see, I'm pulling it out on the edges a little bit to start to shape the eye without going in with a really dark color. This is more forgiving. Then I'm going in with a darker color this time, and I'm focusing more of it on the outside. This way of layering your eyeshadow from medium, dark to deepest color really just gives you a bit of space and time to be able to control the eyeshadow. And then we're going to go into the darkest color, and this time I'm using an even thinner brush because I don't want to make it muddy. I want it to have that gradient. So every time you do something, you want to go in with like a smaller brush to sort of make it more of like a gradient, especially on the ends. I do use this color as well, once again, to wing out the eye a little bit and pull the shadow a little bit further than what the eye naturally sits at. This is to create an illusion. And lastly, the darkest color. And I'm going to go in one last time with this really dark color. And as you can see, I've smudged it a little bit, but sometimes it's good that it smudges, and then you take a cotton tip and it actually blends it out really nicely and seamlessly. You can sometimes shape your eyeshadow with a cotton tip if you don't have a brush, but as you can see, it's quite smoky now, but I just keep going back and forth until I kind of have that desired shape, but I really focused on the outside. I'm going back in with the highlighter that I used before. I've used my finger just to pop a little bit in the inner corner. This will bring life back into this very matte look. I use a clean brush also to sort of buff out the harsh lines because sometimes there's a very big contrast and you just want to make it very nice and seamless. Now this is another technique I never skip. I always line the top lash line just to make it fuller and thicker and makes the eyes look much bigger as well. I decided to cut out the steps on how I do my brows because it's just so tedious and it goes on forever, so maybe I'll make another video another time. But basically I use two colors. I do a lighter color at the front, a darker color in the back, just to give it that nice gradient. I always mark in how I want my brows to start and how I want my brows to end. Usually I hold it up in the middle of the nostril and put the pencil up, and that's where your brows should start. And my brows are uneven, so one side will have a shorter start than the other, so it's important to even them out in the very beginning, and you can start mapping them and then you can fill it out afterwards. So I like to use a combination of products. I will use a brow pencil and then I will go in with a brow powder afterwards as well. And as you can see, the Anastasia Beverly Hills powder is one of my favorites. I like doing this because I find that when you try to fill out big gaps with a pencil, especially a waxy pencil, it looks very thick and very heavy. I used to use brow pomade a lot and I just do not like that look anymore, so I prefer using the combination of these two. My brows are still quite sleek. It's not that bushy brow, but I prefer it this way. So I usually go in with quite a natural lash. However, I've been experimenting with these lately and I don't really mind it. And for this look, it gives it a nice dramatic finish, but you can still go in with a softer lash because some people can find that their eyes get lost with mink lashes. Please do your bottom lashes even if you don't have any. I don't have any, but look, it still makes a difference. So I'm assuming that everyone that is here has come from my Instagram, and you're very well aware that I love a overdrawn, full, juicy, glossy lip, and this is how I get it. So I use a brown lip liner always. This is a new one that I'm trying out and I love, and it gives me a really nice full and dark lip. On the bottom lip, I'm not afraid to go a little bit over my natural lip line because it's quite forgiving because you can't really see that bottom lip as much. It almost just looks like a shadow, so you can go a little bit deeper. At the top, you've got to be very careful. I always start with the Cupid's bow first because once you start the Cupid's bow, it guides you to how you're going to draw the rest of the lip, and it's like that. Boom. If you can see, it looks a bit crazy, but that's because some of the foundation has covered my lip, but once I rub it off, you can see where the actual lip starts and where the lip liner is. But you'll just shape the rest. So my technique to applying lipstick is pop the colour on in the centre, however use your fingers as the tool. This will help buff it out, make it less opaque and sort of blend it into the actual lips. And I do a couple of colours until I get the perfect colour. And then I'm going to top it off with the gloss. Take off the excess lip colour on the edges if you like, because sometimes it gets really claggy. However, gloss is a must for me. I feel like it hydrates my lips and it smooths out my lips more than lipstick does. Once the gloss is on, look at that. There you go. And then next up, nose contouring. I find that a lot of people just do 2 stripes down the nose. It just looks a little bit unnatural. Your nose naturally has a little bit more shape than 2 little strips that go down the nose. So try to buff out the edges like I have, the bottom of the tip of the nose, and you want to blend it out in the eyebrow and eyeshadow area, but it just takes practice. Nose contouring isn't the most natural thing, but try to buff it out as well as you can. And then lastly, I always take a fluffy brush at the very, very end, buff everything together. This is so important. And finally, you want to set everything. You want to set all these powders, bring the skin back to life, and you're pretty much ready to go. And all you need to put on is some hoops.